Welcome to a Simple Therapy podcast. Real conversations, brave stories, and simple, soulful insights for therapists and anyone on a healing journey. I'm Sindee Gozansky, licensed therapist, supervisor, and a fellow human figuring it out too. Around here, we believe healing doesn't have to be complicated, and that leading with your heart still matters. We talk about what it really means to be human in and out of the therapy room. You'll hear from therapists, mental health professionals, and people courageously sharing their personal healing journeys. Because whether you're the therapist or the client, we're all human here. Let's keep it simple and keep showing up. Hello and welcome to a Simple Therapy podcast. I'm your host, Sindee Gozansky, and today it's such a pleasure for me to introduce our guest, Dr. Bruce Chalmer. Dr. Bruce Chalmer is a psychologist in Vermont who has been working with couples for over 30 years. Through his teaching, consulting, and books, his ideas have helped thousands of couples and therapists. Together with his wife, Judy Alexander, Dr. Chalmer hosts the podcast Couples Therapy in 7 Words. It's amazing. I've already binged some of the episodes. Please check it out. He is also the author of 3 books, Reigniting the Spark, Why Stable Relationships Lose Intimacy and How to Get It Back. Another book is It's Not About Communication, Why Everything You Know About Couples Therapy is Wrong. And his most recent book, Betrayal and Forgiveness, How to Navigate the Turmoil and Learn to Trust Again. So I'm really excited to talk about couples therapy. As a practicing couples therapist, this is near and dear to my heart. Welcome to the podcast, Bruce. I'm so glad you're here.
Well, thanks. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yes, absolutely. For our listeners, while you're listening, if you're interested in checking out his website, which is great and a wealth of resources, I'll just give it to you now, and then you can always check it later. It's Bruce Chalmer, CHALMER.com. So you have been writing these books, it seems like in really close time, starting 2020, 2022, and then 2024. I noticed that when you shared them with me. So prolific as an author, as a therapist, as a podcaster. I guess my first question is, what inspires you to do this work and put your messages out there and serve couples and therapists?
Well, it's kind of 2 pieces to that. I mean, what inspires me to do the work of being a couples therapist is, it's funny, maybe this is just a circular answer, but it feels like a calling. I'm inspired because I'm inspired, it feels like a calling. So people who aren't seeing me don't realize I'm not a young person. I'm 74. If you saw me, you'd say, oh yeah, I believe that. I might sound younger, maybe, I don't know, but I'm 74. So I'm not young. I think you noted in the bio, I've been doing it, in private practice for a little over 30 years now. So I was already in my 40s when I started doing it. There was other stuff I was doing. Used to be a statistician back in the day. I taught courses in data communications. It was fun doing that stuff. I'm kind of, sometimes I'll say I'm a recovering nerd with frequent relapses, I'm kind of nerdy and I like that kind of stuff. But it wasn't until I got into doing therapy, and I was trained in individual, also in couples and family. And it wasn't until I started doing that I started feeling like, wow, I feel alive doing this. This feels like what I'm here to do. And couples in particular, I mentioned I worked with lots of individuals and families as well. But the more I did it, the more I wanted to focus on couples. I don't have a simple explanation for why that's true either, other than it just feels so compelling. And you're a couples therapist too, so I don't know how you relate to that.
Yeah.
How do you relate to that? Why do you like doing couples therapy?
I love it. Let's do it. This is exactly what I wanted today, right? Turn the tables a little too. It's very similar, because also there's just this thing of the way you can recognize helping the couple can have impact on their families, on the kids, on the communities, really the whole world, that it's just an effort that we can do to help a couple. I think it can be so beautiful and so powerful in ways that we never see. And that's also what inspires me. And I love the circular part that we're inspired because we're inspired.
Yeah. But,
Yeah.
and, it's interesting. You sort of, it has those wider effects. I realized early on in my work, I realized even when I was working with an individual, I was feeling a responsibility to wider systems.
Yeah.
So, yes, I'm working with an individual, helping them heal and feel better and get past whatever they're trying to get past. But I also felt a responsibility to their spouse or family or whatever and community in general.
Mhm.
So I was already working from that kind of perspective. And again, working with a couple, it's so right in front of you. The
Yes.
stuff that needs healing. I'm not
Yeah.
saying it's always simple, but it's always there right in front of you. And, in this day and age of extreme polarization, even politically, a lot of the work of couples therapy is very similar to a lot of the work I think needs to happen to heal the country, to heal the world.
Mhm.
There's, it isn't a mere coincidence that Bill Doherty, do you know the name? Bill
Yes.
Doherty's pretty well
Discernment
known as a couples
counseling.
therapist.
Right.
Yeah, he's one of the founders of Braver Angels, which is an organization that is dedicated to having conversations across the red-blue divide. And I just find that really inspiring. And it's a lot of the same stuff I'm doing with couples, inviting people to recognize their common humanity and their, you know, there's a moment I like to invite people to get to that I refer to as the oh shit moment. And the reason I call it the oh shit moment as opposed to the aha moment is it doesn't necessarily solve the problem, but the oh shit moment is when a couple is realizing, oh shit, that's why we're having this misunderstanding. That's why we're having this problem. You're not crazy, are you? You're not evil. I'm not either. We're having a problem, but at least I don't have to be angry at you about it. Maybe we can work with this. That's a lot of therapy is designed to get people to that sort of sense of being able to hear each other.
Yeah. Yeah. So
So
so beautifully said. For
you
sure.
also asked about the writing, and I'll tell you that the reason I write books is because it's fun and the barrier to entry these days is pretty low. Same thing about doing a podcast. Why do I do a podcast? Why do you podcast? I mean, my wife and I do it because it's fun. We enjoy doing it together. We've been doing it for 5 years. It just keeps being fun, so we keep doing it. We don't have to do it, but we do it because we enjoy it. And we learn, as I'm guessing you do too,
Love
learn a
it.
lot from everybody we talk to. It's really, it's neat that way.
Yes, exactly. It's a gift for us as well. And I think it really, can touch more people who are interested in learning and getting help. The whole thing. It's amazing. And thank you for sharing that. I did not know about Bill Doherty's work there, and that sounds
Okay.
fascinating. So that definitely will check into that. I do appreciate what you say that there is this moment where suddenly couples can have that sense of perspective of taking responsibility for their moves, their actions, the impact on their partner, and then even like having that deeper understanding. It's kind of hard to define, but like you said, that oh shit moment, you kind of know it when you see it, they feel it, everything changes. You feel a shift happening. Um, so we're going to dive into that for sure. And for those listening, Dr. Bruce is young at heart and I'm not that far behind you, a decade plus. So, we're all there. I love when therapists can also share, like, you can do this, you can start it later in life, you can start it early and stay. And there's just so many ways I think that we can impact others when we care about people a lot. And that was something was also interested in having you share a little um, kind of that notion of your approach. And the reason I think it seems very fundamental, perhaps to you and me, but I work with a lot of students and interns, and the education is different than perhaps how we approach our therapy, healing primarily through the relationship. That the human connection is the power of therapy. It's not, sure, skills help, plans help, approaches help, but it's not always um, seen how powerful that connection is. And then also without the expert stance. So I'd love if you could just share like something about that, how you got to it, how you use it in your work with couples.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, I'd love to. My earliest training was in psychodynamic.
Mhm.
Learned a great deal from that, but I realized pretty early on, I think I did 2 years of internships with a really wonderful psychodynamic supervisor, all individual. There
Mhm.
wasn't a family or a couples there. And I realized as that went on, there are ways of thinking about people that just don't fit with how I want to think about people. This is an unfair caricature, of course, but the caricature would be like in psychodynamic, how do you interpret when the client arrives for the session? If they arrive early, they're anxious. If they arrive late, they're resistant. If they arrive on time, they're compulsive. It's that sort of sense. Or I remember this moment in time when I was in a supervision group, and one of the other interns was presenting work he had been doing with a client of his. And he talked about this guy he'd seen 2 or 3 times. And the guy came in one day and he said, wow, I'm so much better off at work. I'm getting along with my wife better. I'm getting along with my kids better. And the intern then said, well, obviously it's a flight to health. And I know what the concept means, and maybe some folks listening here do or don't, but it's saying, well, you haven't gotten to your really core, ways that you're messed up. And we know that because you haven't been working long enough. You must be messed up. So if you're actually, behaving better, you're just resisting actually looking at your serious problems, which in some cases could be true, but in other, so I'm a little twerp that I was in my late 30s at that point. I said, well, how can you tell the difference between that and actually being better? And they looked at me like, where are you from? Anyway, I realized I didn't want to think about people that way. I didn't want to have an expert stance that assumed that I could possibly know better than they do. First of all, how they should live their lives, which I don't. And how that I could know better than they do what's going on with them. I don't even know that much. I am not in any way downrating the importance of expertise, but the expertise that I have developed over the years, and anybody who's done it long enough is in ways of having the conversation that might be helpful. Mm-hmm. That's a very broad way of saying it. It's not in telling them how they should live. It's not in you can hear in how I'm saying, or I'll be explicit. I'm not sitting there diagnosing them. Yeah. I'm not sitting there trying to fit them into categories. Again, knowledge of some diagnoses is really important. I need to know, wow, what I might be seeing here is a manic episode. That's not the same thing as saying, wow, you're just really happy about something. I need to know about that stuff. But, you see so much of this on the internet now where, people will do checklists and decide, oh, I'm with a narcissist, and this is how you talk to a narcissist, and this is how you talk to a borderline. And there's something about that just seems inhumane. So I tend to steer clear of that. So along the way, I got quite a bit of training in narrative therapy, which the fun thing about narrative therapy is that it deconstructs itself. It can get a little bit tiresome actually in that way. But I did a fair amount there, and it really is all about sort of not coming from an expert stance. Mm-hmm. And more generally, that second book you mentioned, the one with the snarky title, it's not about communication, why everything you know about couples therapy is wrong. Is that snarky or what?
Oh, it's so great, Bruce. And I had written it down. These are my notes, everyone. I had written down one of the segments about how that's such a myth that couples think they need communication skills. And I was like, oh, we're not going to get into that. But hey, let's do it because
I'm so glad you went there.
I'm all about that, right? They come in, they say, oh, we want to do communication skills. We need better communication. Or new therapists say, I'm going to help them with their communication skills.
That's
and I'm
right.
like,
teaches in active listening and nonviolent communication and all that. Yeah. And that actually relates to my sense of the expert stance or not. All of those things, all of those communication techniques that we tend to learn or want to teach people, they're not bad ideas. They're actually ideas. And what I love to point out is if you were a fly on the wall, or if you were John Gottman, let's say, and
exactly.
we're, having people in your lab and you're inviting them to have a conversation about something they disagree about, and you're videotaping and you're measuring their physiological responses and all that stuff. And so if you're that, fly on the wall, and it's a couple that's really doing well, they're just relaxed with each other and love each other and enjoy each other and they're disagreeing about something. What will you observe? You will observe that they are very informally following those rules. Informally. Not strictly. They're not conscious of it. But they're not calling each other names, certainly. They're active listening in the sense that they really do seem to want to hear what the other person is saying. That's what it looks like when a couple is functioning well and enjoys each other. Teaching people to imitate that won't make them function well. That is the basic fallacy. And so many people think it will. It's like, so if I get you to talk in those ways, then you'll feel better, right? No, actually, they're talking that way because they feel better. They're not feeling better because they talk that way. So that's when I say, yeah, it's not about communication. There are a few exceptions to that I recognize. Occasionally, I'll meet someone who's somewhere on the autistic spectrum, and there is an actual communication problem there. It's like we don't use the formal term Asperger's anymore, but
Right.
that concept of someone who doesn't know how to read someone else's emotions accurately, yep, that's going to cause an actual communications problem. They don't need couples therapy. They need skills training. They need
Mhm.
training in how to read. And there are folks who specialize in that, who work
Yeah.
with people on the spectrum. Perfectly valid, but that, it's okay. That's a communications problem. Or, if they literally don't speak the same language, which
Right.
if they're coming to see me, I mean, I'm only fluent in English. I have smatterings of other languages, but if they're coming to see me, at least one of them speaks English. But
Yeah.
if the other one hardly speaks English, okay, they have a communications problem. They generally will learn to speak a common language, and that's how they'll work
Mhm.
that out, or they won't, but whatever. But generally speaking, the couples who think they have communications problems, which is rough seat of the pants guess, 90% of the couples who come in are saying in the first session, we
Mhm.
need to communicate. We need tools for communication. That's what they're all saying. And they actually are very effectively communicating. The problem isn't that they're ineffective. The problem is what they're communicating.
Right.
What they're communicating is contempt or mistrust or condescension or anger. And when they're communicating those things very effectively, it's like it's painful. And of course, that's happening because that's what they're feeling. And so learning communication techniques, you can be every bit as contemptuous with an I statement as you can with a you statement
Exactly.
if you work on it.
Right.
So
Right.
that's what I mean by that. I do have to comment also on the subtitle of that book, Why Everything You Know About Couples Therapy is Wrong, because that also relates to that concept of not being an expert. I apply that to myself as well. It's a spoiler alert. I say that in one of the last chapters. That applies to me too. Everything I know about couples therapy is wrong too, because ideas are really helpful. All the ideas, all the various schools, I guess you do EFT, right?
Mhm.
Wonderful set of ideas. I was trained in narrative, wonderful set of ideas. I've mentioned psychodynamic, great set of ideas, lots of different ideas, many of which conflict, but they're all interesting ideas, all useful ideas. When they become ideological, they become harmful. Then you're not listening anymore. You're putting people in boxes. You're
Exactly.
shutting things down, and so it's that sense of ideology. And so that's what do you tell students? What I would be if I were. I'm not doing that anymore. I did some supervision way long ago, but I would be really stressing whatever. There's all kinds of good ideas out there, and you'll find the ones that work for you, but none of them have all the answers to everything. And you need to be aware of that. It's the knowing that causes problems. It's when ideas harden into what I like to point out, when ideas harden into ideology, they become a caricature of the good ideas. You know,
Mhm. Right.
take religion or don't.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
we're both involved in religion. I know that.
Yeah.
Take religion. If all the religions I know of basically are saying you should be kind to people, you should be loving toward people, you should take care of people who need taken care of, and yet so many religions devolve into killing people because they're not loving God the right way or something, or they're not using
Yeah.
the right language or the right metaphors.
Right.
So it becomes a caricature.
Yes. Yeah. Really good point. I mean, we see those institutions, religions, other things grappling into those ideologies and getting just so constrained, and then it becomes harmful. I really also love the way you've described all of this, and especially that sense of like, yeah, I mean, I've learned EFT, but also I use other approaches because I'm listening for what the client or the couple needs, and it's not just one way. And so we're constantly expanding, and that's the beautiful thing about therapists. Just like you said, you're always learning and growing, and so it's this great career for like personal development, self-development junkies, right? Because
Oh
we're
yeah.
always doing that for us and trying to help others. The conversation is so important. Having that conversation with somebody, right? We're not experts. We're having a conversation. And sometimes people say, like, oh, it's not therapy if I'm just having a conversation. And I disagree. I think those conversations are key. And what we're ultimately trying to get, just like you said, is for our couples to have that same kind of conversation where it's in, maybe it's, you call it the I thou space or whatever. It's in
Hmm.
that place.
Yeah,
or
that's what I would say there. The term I use in general for that is intimacy.
intimacy.
Actually, the book I'm working on now is a workbook, and it's centered on the idea. And I talk about this idea in all my other books too. One way of understanding what keeps people wanting to be in a couples relationship is if there are two basic sets of needs that are fulfilled enough: stability and intimacy. And they're both really important. And yet the skills you need for stability sometimes interfere with the skills you need for intimacy. Skills you need for stability are, I'll like to call them the boring skills.
Yeah.
You got to be responsible and reliable and accountable. All good things, but they're boring as hell. It's like
Right.
nobody wrote, nobody. There's no song "Call Me Responsible." You know, I like to point that out. It's like
Yeah.
it's boring, but it's really important. That's what you
Right.
need. But intimacy is a very different phenomenon, and intimacy just meaning being present and honest with yourself and each other. That requires that you tolerate anxiety, not avoid it. So the skills of that are not at all boring. They're
Right.
scary.
Yeah.
To actually be willing to say something that you know is going to raise your partner's anxiety or your own anxiety or both, even something as simple as just a simple complaint. It's like, hey, I wish you would do something different from what you're doing. That's going to raise anxiety. And if you're too worried about stability, perhaps because those conversations haven't gone well, people will then tend to suppress being honest, and it doesn't work well in the domain of intimacy.
Yeah.
So that I
Exactly.
thou space is an intimate space.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And that's also a great example of the communication skills. It's not about communication there. It's about creating whatever we want to call it, some kind of relational security where you could share those feelings or those wants and needs. Um, okay. We could go on so many different tangents because I heard a little differentiation in there and so on. But let's talk about your new book. I'm really excited about it because so many couples come in with a major problem, a betrayal, whether it's an actual infidelity or it's, something they didn't know about their partner using substances or, something even greater that then becomes a betrayal, like, with porn or, anything. Doesn't have to be an affair exactly, but it can be. It could be an affair. It could be escorts, anything. I mean, I'm just thinking about like so many different examples that I've seen. So, the book is titled Betrayal and Forgiveness: How to Navigate the Turmoil and Learn to Trust Again. And you
Mhm.
said it has 12 couples, not just partners, but also siblings, business partners, a whole range of relationships dealing with betrayal. And when you talk about this, you like to start by defining betrayal and forgiveness.
Yes. So betrayal is something that a stranger can't do. Strangers can hurt us, but betrayal implies a relationship. A betrayal, the way I'm using the term, and I think this is pretty common understanding of the way people use the word. If you're betrayed, it's that somebody did something that you never would have thought they would do based on your relationship with them. So, a friend who has who cheats on their husband or wife is disappointing you, but not betraying you. If they're a friend of yours, you might say, "Oh boy, that disappoints me. You would do that," but it's not a betrayal. They don't owe you fidelity; they owe their spouse fidelity. A, a spouse who cheats on you, that's betrayal. It's like you're not, that's not who I thought you were, and it is enormously upsetting to say the least, because it not only leaves you feeling hurt and angry and, wondering about the person who did this to you, it also usually leaves people wondering about themselves. How could I have been so stupid? Or how could I have been so blind? Or how could I have let myself, why couldn't I see this coming? Or, what's the matter with me? Can I
Yeah.
trust my judgment? All those things happen when there's betrayal. So that's what I mean by betrayal. Forgiveness, that one, I better define the term the way I use it, because there's at least two ways that it is used in common parlance, and
Hmm.
I'm stressing one of them and not the other. And
Okay.
I do that for a reason. A lot of times when people say they forgive someone, what they mean is they restore the relationship. The best analogy I can think of for that is if you forgive a financial debt, that literally means, okay, you know what? You don't owe me the money anymore. Forget about it. Let's move on. Whether or not I would loan the money again, that's another story.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Okay. Right.
That's different. That's trust. But we'll carry on our relationship. We'll worry about it. If you don't ask me for money again, it doesn't have to come up. that's done. Or even less, nasty circumstances like, you know what, I want to make that a gift. I know you intended to pay it back. I know you're capable of it. We both feel good. Isn't that lovely? That a
Mm,
lot of parents will do that for kids. They'll make them pay rent, but they'll keep the money, and then they'll give it to them when they leave, and things like that.
yeah.
That's a lovely sort of thing.
Nice.
So everybody feels good. There's some Jewish proverb to that effect, right? When the father gives the son money, they both feel good. When the son gives the father money, they both feel bad. Something like that. Anyway,
It's great.
but it's that kind of forgiveness where that means you're restoring the relationship. I don't mean that at all. I mean the other kind where to forgive someone is to let go of the obsession, let go of the anger,
Mhm.
let go of it's really another way of saying it. It's like processing the trauma. It's like, okay, it's no longer a trigger. And whenever I think about it, I'm no longer propelled into fight or flight or freeze. I don't cross over into panic. That's what I mean by forgiveness. And so in that sense of forgiveness, and this, a lot of people like to, call it, I didn't coin this phrase, but I like it. It's an inside job. Forgiveness is something you can forgive someone who doesn't deserve it in any external way. You can forgive someone who isn't sorry, who doesn't acknowledge they did what they did, who would do it again. You can still forgive
Mhm.
them because that's about your own sense of peace. And, I love to
Yeah.
quote Anne Lamott about that. To not forgive someone is like drinking rat poison and then waiting for the rat to die. It's like, yeah, you're poisoning yourself. It's not doing
Yeah.
you any good.
Right. It's for you.
It's for you.
Mm.
So in that sense, forgiveness, I think, is a necessary step in healing. I'm defining it as a step in healing. You can't forgive when you still need the anger, or you shouldn't. I said, you shouldn't forgive when you still need the anger. If you're in a relationship that is abusive and continues to be abusive, and that causes you to panic, well, that panic is telling you something. That's no time to forgive. That's a time to get yourself safe. Then you can worry
Right.
about forgiving.
Right. And the anger can help you, can motivate you, can like kind of charge you up so that you can take the action you need to
Yeah.
take.
Yeah. And I've met so many folks, and maybe you have too over the years, much more often women than men who were in abusive relationships and weren't able to get out until he threatened the kid or hurt the kid.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden her maternal rage just takes over and she can act and
Yeah.
she can
Yeah.
get out. And that
Right.
takes amazing courage to be able to do that. But that's what I mean by forgive. So
Mhm.
in that sense, you can forgive someone you don't trust at all. And so I separate those two steps in the process that,
Yes.
yeah, you need to be able to forgive. And then maybe you can think clearly so that then you can say, all
Exactly.
right,
Right.
can I rebuild trust with this person who hurt me? And for let's say a couple, a married couple or a partnered couple, that's a crucial question, especially if they have kids.
Mhm.
And I have, and I'll bet you have too. I've worked with lots of couples where there's been infidelity and they've been able to go on and heal and stay
Yeah.
together.
Right.
And I always find that very inspiring. And the only way that happens is if they're better off than they were even before the infidelity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right.
And
It's
then,
beyond a new relationship then.
yeah, it
Yeah.
is. And then they're grateful. Now,
Mhm.
I've never had anybody say, thanks for cheating. Haven't heard that one yet. I have heard lots of people in various ways say, hey, thanks for precipitating this crisis. Apparently,
Mm.
we needed one. We didn't realize it. But look how much better off we are for having gone through the growth of this painful crisis.
Yeah.
We're both much better off. Our intimacy level is much better because we're really honest with each other. We're better off with, it's really inspiring when
Yeah.
I see that happen.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I agree. And it's hard to describe, but it does keep you in the game, so to speak.
Hmm.
I think it's so helpful the way you define betrayal and forgiveness like this, and really giving the couple and the therapist hope too, like the forgiveness, that inside job, so that you can get through and let go of the anger and the obsession and the trauma and start to think clearly. Because often somebody comes in and the person who was betrayed doesn't think they can even ever get to that point of like not feeling crazy and being able to think clearly. So that gives them some hope. And that's also part of the process. And also, the relationship piece for betrayal is so key. And that I've heard you say, we have expectations in a relationship, and those expectations are what were dashed, and that makes it such a betrayal. because of the closeness of the relationship, the expectations we hold, and it just helps you kind of start to understand what you're seeing in front of you.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it's interesting because occasionally there will be couples who will come in where some of the early work is, well, do you really have to think of this as a betrayal? Maybe it's something you don't like, but maybe your expectation wasn't as realistic as you thought. Porn is a great example of that, where again, almost always gendered, where a woman is upset because a man was looking at porn. And sometimes she's feeling like that is cheating. That is the same thing as if you went and had sex with someone. And the guy
Yeah.
is usually just, he feels bad because she's so upset. But the guy is usually mystified by that because to the guy, it's not in anything. It's virtually no relationship to that. He's just being stimulated by images.
Hmm.
And of course, now in the days of the internet, there's this huge gray area that never existed. It used to be, yes, it was images or it
Right.
was a real person. Now it's like, well, what about if it's a person who's actually a real person, but it's a virtual relationship or something? It's amazing what the internet has done there.
Yes. Super complicated.
But I've worked with folks where sometimes it'll come around where the woman will say, well, when I think about it, I don't like it. I don't approve of porn. I don't like that he did it, but I guess it isn't really a betrayal. It's just something I'm learning. I didn't realize that's kind of how he works. Or that's kind of how men's brain works or whatever it is.
Hmm.
And she can relax some. They still have some issues to deal with, but
Right.
it doesn't have to feel like a betrayal all the time. But most of the folks I work with, it's pretty clear. If there's
Yes.
been an actual sexual affair with somebody, they're usually not saying, no, that's not really a betrayal.
Yeah. 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 Exactly. Exactly.
Mhm.
Um, so with this, without oversimplifying, you do say, oh, there are 3 steps to forgiveness. And I think
I do.
it's a great starting point. I like things to start off simple and then we can get into the nitty gritty. So I'm all about that.
Yeah. So yes, 3 steps. I did. You may have heard me say in another podcast or something.
Yeah.
Beware of authors who say there are 3 steps to anything. That's you can tell my deep seated suspicion of people who think they have all the answers, including me. And maybe that's reflecting that I'm not that far from being able to be quite arrogant about my own ideas, so I have to be
Oh,
careful with that.
I think you're pretty humble.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
It's an effort. What can I tell you? So it's whatever. If you're writing books, it's a chutzpahdik thing to do. It's like
Hmm.
there's a certain element of gall involved in doing that. But in any case, yeah, 3 steps to forgiveness. Step one, forgive yourself. And the reason I say forgive yourself as step one is I'll say always, maybe there's exceptions, but pretty much always there's an element of self-blame involved when you get badly hurt, especially a betrayal, because some of that was about your own expectations. So it's like, how could I be so stupid than to think this person wouldn't cheat on me, or what was why wasn't I more aware? We'll beat ourselves up over letting ourselves get hurt. There's a real, I like to call it an evolutionary logic to why we blame ourselves. Little kids blame themselves for being abused. It's, and maybe you've seen this too. I've worked
Yeah.
with lots of adults who will describe having been, sexually abused at the age of 4. And they'll say, well, I should have stopped it. And they know better rationally. It's
Yeah.
like, have you seen a
Right.
4-year-old recently? I mean, come on.
Yeah.
But they still blame themselves because the alternative there is to think that the world is completely unsafe all the time.
Yeah.
I'd rather think, no, this must be my fault because maybe that gives me some sense I have control over it. So self-blame is always part of the story, whether it's justified or not. And of course, in the case of betrayal, some element of saying, I might have been part of the context for this. I'm not saying, I'm not letting the person off the hook for cheating. That
Right.
was immoral. They shouldn't have done it. But maybe I was part of that. I don't know. Anyway, that element, you have
Yeah.
to get to the point of saying, what do I mean by forgiving yourself? It's when you're able to say, if I really recognize I knew what I knew and I didn't know what I didn't know, I was who I was doing the best I could,
Hmm.
given what I knew and didn't know or didn't want to know, whatever. There's no point beating myself up about it. That was the reality. That's what it was. And that actually, I'll throw this in here. That that sense of, well, that was the reality. There was a basis for it. I don't like it, but there was a basis, even if I don't fully understand it. That's faith. That's what I mean by faith.
That's the faith that you have to start accepting there was a reality.
There was a reality and there was a rightness to it. That's what I mean by faith. It's not merely accepting reality. That's included, but it's saying, damn, there's a rightness to it. It's like, it's not right that that person cheated on me, but there's a rightness to the forces that were involved. I can see why that sort of thing can happen. If it's just the way the universe is laid out, it's not surprising things like that can happen. I can't keep track of all the variables. I don't have a God's eye
Right.
view of the universe.
Right.
But
Yeah.
there's a rightness to it, even though it hurts. And so to feel that about yourself is to forgive yourself. Well, I claim step two. Step two is to forgive the person who hurt you. I claim that's a short step, because if you really are able to say of yourself, well, I was doing the best I could, then you look at the person who hurt you and say, well, they shouldn't have done that. I wish they hadn't. But, given who they were and what they were thinking and what ideas they had going in their heads, I, I wish they hadn't. It was wrong, but
Mhm.
I see why they did it. It's like they were doing the best they could too on that level. You know, you could say, well, then I'm excusing everything. And I don't mean to excuse anything with that statement. I'm just observing, well, yeah, this seems like a non sequitur, but it isn't. There's a guy I like to give a shout out to in a lot of these interviews I'm doing, a man named Daryl Davis, who you may have heard of. He is a black man, jazz musician,
Mm.
actually, pretty well
Oh.
known in the jazz world, I guess.
Mhm.
He is his claim to fame, and he's been profiled like on 60 Minutes and some of the TV shows. Um, he decided, how can people hate me if they don't even know me? And so he struck up a friendship with the Imperial Wizard of the KKK,
Wow.
and and it was amazing. He tells the story. You can find his TED Talk, look up Daryl Davis, find his TED Talk.
Yeah.
But it's an astonishing act of, what an act of faith. He
Mhm.
wasn't saying, oh, those KKK guys are just fine. He was saying, they're not crazy, probably. They don't think they're evil. They're espousing ideas that certainly he wasn't about to agree with. He was saying, they thought him inferior, but they would talk to him. And he didn't go there and yell at them. The Imperial Wizard invited him to some rallies. He got to know
Wow.
some of the guys. Well, he now has a collection of like 200, well, it's not literally 200 robes, but a lot of these guys, over 200 men, have renounced white supremacy after
Wow.
conversations with Daryl Davis and
Mhm.
his friends. And, they come to realize, oh, I didn't think this was harmful, but I guess it is. And they were able to rethink it. And he
Well,
did it through sheer incredible courage, but also respect.
yeah.
That's the same kind of faith I think it takes to forgive someone who's hurt you. It's like, well, given those ideas you had flying in your head, and you know how various people have written about this, when somebody cheats, let's say, there's usually a sequence of sort of justifying thoughts that lead you there. And that's what was happening. And you don't have to be crazy for that to happen. It can happen to a sane person in the
Right.
right circumstances.
Yeah.
And so that's what it means to forgive the one who hurt you. So that's step two. Step three, I have a name that you don't have to be religious to appreciate, though you'll see why I say that. Step three, I say forgive God.
Mm.
What do I mean by forgive God? Well, you can forgive yourself, you can forgive the person who hurt you, but you still have to recognize, come on, God, or whatever you want to
Yeah.
call the universe.
Right. The
Why
universe
does this have to
was
happen?
yeah. Right.
I thought I had, I'm doing the right stuff. Well, Harold Kushner's book, Why Do Bad Things Happen
Yeah.
to Good People? It's like, what are we supposed to do with that? There's no simple answer to that, but to be able to forgive that there's a rightness even to that.
Right. That goes back to the rightness, that the
Yes.
reality has this rightness to it, even if we can't understand it.
Yeah. And that is a mindset that I call faith. And
Mhm.
that's the thing that distinguishes, broadly speaking, the couples that can do the work and the couples that have a really hard time with it. The ones who come in without that sort of faith are the ones who are coming in saying, this shouldn't have happened, and we want to go back to how it was. It was fine before. And the one who was cheated on is saying, yeah, we need rules to make sure that he or she, whatever,
Oh.
never does that again. And the one who did the cheating is saying, yeah, I'll never do it again. And I'm hoping that my partner will stop bugging me about it because they'll forget about it and move on. That is not faith. The ones who can do the work are the ones who come in where, let's say, the one who's cheated on says, okay, let's say it's the woman who was cheated on and she's speaking of her husband and she's saying, this is incredibly painful and it hurts and I'm rethinking everything, but I know he's not basically evil. And I
Exactly.
believe him when he says he loves me. There must be some way to understand this. He shouldn't have done it. I'm not saying he's not
Right.
morally
Right.
responsible, but
Exactly.
we're going to have to understand this. And the guy who did the cheating is saying, I could say I was crazy, but I'm not crazy. And I feel terrible. I shouldn't have. I feel such regret, but there was a context for this. We better look at it.
Yeah.
That's faith. That's what I mean by faith. They're the ones who are going to do the work and come out okay one way or the other. Together or separate, but
Right.
that's
Right.
what I mean by faith.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Bruce. And it's so true. I recently have had a couple where there's, really horrible situation and she was able to say just what you said. I know
Mm,
he's a good person. I love that person who he is. And, that desire for him to see, where his healing needs to come from. And sometimes the person who's done the betraying, right, gets stuck in kind of what you said before, like feeling like they're evil or they're terrible or, they're so broken or almost like a victim. So
yeah.
that stance can go for either person. But I think you absolutely like it comes to this different place and there's that respect, there's that 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 faith or that forgiveness of self and the reality in God that starts to come into play,
Mhm.
where the real change can happen.
Yeah, it's interesting. The one who did the cheating has a lot of work to do
Yeah.
indeed. And as one of the great ironies I've always noted, an apology isn't effective from someone who is lost in shame. They
Right.
actually have to be coming from a place of recognizing, wow, I feel terribly guilty. I did a bad thing, but I am a valid person. I let myself down as well as you, as that kind of feeling, and genuinely apologizing from a standpoint that says, I should have done better. I know I'm capable of doing better, and I'm so sorry. That's credible. It doesn't
Yeah.
always fix things, but it's
Mm.
credible. Whereas an apology that is, well, sometimes people just can't apologize if they are so overwhelmed with shame. It feels like they're annihilating themselves, and all they could do is lash out.
Yeah.
And that's really painful. So yeah, a person who did the cheating has a lot of work of forgiveness to do of themselves. They also have
Mhm.
to forgive their partner. It's, whatever it is that led them to cheat often is they've been angry at their partner for a while. Often, not always.
Right.
And they have to be able to forgive how their partners treated them since they found out about the cheating, which usually isn't very nice. There's a lot of stuff. And they have to,
Mhm.
well, then trust is a whole other issue. They have to be able to trust that the partner could possibly not be angry at them the rest of their lives.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, right. Not a year from now, 10 years from now, whatever it is. And again, it's also coming back to that notion of conversation, right? That healing that happens in these deep, hard conversations that, we can be a part of. And some of the healing, like you're talking about, comes from these other places of trauma, of shame, like that you know, healing and amends process includes uh, those pieces as well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, so one last thing about your book, because you have another, um, great place where you help people, and I think listeners are always wondering, like, what if it's more of that decision process? Like the couple is just, how do I decide? Are we going to stay together? Are we going to break up? Um, Maybe there's kids, they have to learn to co parent, or, that decision process in the wake of betrayal is really tough.
That's really, I think the main thing I tend to underline with folks
Hmm.
is, why you're finding it difficult? Because it's difficult.
Yeah.
It's not, there's nothing wrong with you that you're finding this difficult. It's like, yep, it is difficult because there isn't certainty there. There is no, I mean, occasionally it's like,
Yeah.
well, those aren't the ones that are wrestling with it. They're wrestling with it because it's difficult. You don't know how it's going to turn out. It's people deciding to stay together or not stay together. And I work with lots of couples in this situation where there isn't infidelity, whether there is or isn't.
Right.
That is a difficult thing. I have some guidelines I like to toss out in that sort of situation. How do you know when to call it quits? I did a video on this like 9 or 10 years ago or something like that, which is still out there. And, it's again one of those oversimplified little structures. But if you think about what you're dealing with and divide them into deal breakers versus growing pains, and by deal breakers, I don't mean things that are merely difficult and painful. I mean, I don't mean to trivialize that,
Yeah.
but I mean things that are logical deal breakers. The classic is, a couple in their 20s or 30s or something, and they haven't, it's amazing how many people I work with where this is true. They've been together for 6 months or a year or whatever, and they haven't talked about, by the way, do you want to have kids?
Exactly. I knew
Never
you were
talked
going
about it.
there. I
Yeah,
knew you were
and it's
going
like,
there.
and
Yeah.
come to discover they're on opposite sides of that. If somebody doesn't change their mind, that is a classic deal breaker. It just you can't sort of have again, and it doesn't. Yeah, nothing else really works. So they end up breaking the deal. There are other things like that where people come to realize there's some difference that they just can't. They just can't deal with. It's sad, but they know what to do. They have to break the deal. It's they find a way
Mhm.
to split up as humanely
Yeah.
as they can. If it isn't a deal breaker, and I'm talking about nasty stuff. I mean, I suppose I could even say violence, although violence is like an emergency. Violence is like dangerous. But if it's even if it's like emotional abuse or, really hard stuff, um, if you've been living with it for a while, that's a growing pain, not a deal breaker, because in theory, people can grow and not do that anymore. You know what I
Yes.
mean? It's not a
I
logical deal
believe
breaker.
that. Exactly.
Yeah. So again, I'm not trying to say, oh, stay with somebody who's abusive. You probably your best bet to get out. But I'm just saying logically, that's not a deal breaker. And of course, then there's the things that aren't about abuse, but things like infidelity. Great example.
Mhm.
Betrayals. They
Mhm.
are not logical deal breakers. They are really painful. So those are the situations where, okay, that's growing pains. And my general guideline about growing pains is simply don't break up too soon. Didn't say don't break up, not for me to
Mhm.
say that,
Yeah.
but don't break up before you learn what you need to learn. Which is that's the folks who can do that are the ones who are coming in with faith. They're
Yeah.
saying, all right,
Totally.
obviously I need to learn something from this. And don't know yet if we're going to stay together or not. Just recently, just earlier in this week, started with a couple that was in that situation where there's been infidelity, but they're really thoughtfully trying to. And this was some of the man revealed infidelity from like 3 years before. He finally couldn't bear carrying this. I think they were buying a house together, is
Yeah.
what the situation was. He said, "You have a right to know this." You know, he wanted to come clean. She was reeling from it, but really feeling like, all right, we need to figure this out. They're in that place. That's what I mean by, yeah, don't break up in a panic.
Right.
Again, unless it's what panic is for,
Exactly.
which is an
Right.
emergency situation.
Right.
If it's not
But
an emergency,
usually,
yeah, don't break up because you're freaking out. Try not to freak out.
yeah.
Try to get yourself calmed down. Figure out a way to do it. You may need to not be in the same room for a while, but try
Mm.
and calm down. Then you can think more clearly about what to do. So, now who gets to define what too soon is? Well, not me.
Yeah. But
That
don't make decisions in a crisis.
yeah.
That's just really good advice, I think.
Yeah, the classic,
Yeah.
classic sort of they say that in like AA and things like that. First year of sobriety, I think they usually say like this is not a time to be marrying someone or buying a house
Right.
or whatever. People violate that routinely. But I do
Yeah.
have, by the way, I'll throw this in thinking of AA. In the book that I'm writing now,
Yes.
I do mention the Serenity Prayer. I'm not part of 12-step movements, but I have great respect for it. I work with lots of
Yeah.
folks who are. And so Serenity Prayer, the classic Serenity Prayer, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference, right? It's great,
Yes.
right? But
Beautiful.
I like to add the Meta-Serenity Prayer. I have invented the Meta-Serenity Prayer.
Okay.
The Meta-Serenity Prayer is, God grant me the serenity to accept the fact that I can't always know whether or not I can change something, and grant me the courage to act anyway.
Mm.
That's what I call the Meta-Serenity Prayer.
Wow.
Because that's the Serenity Prayer itself, of course, is really important. The faith aspect is even recognizing the reality that we often, it doesn't matter how much wisdom you have, you're not going to
Right.
know the difference
We don't
because you're
always
not going to
know.
know how it's going to turn out.
Yeah.
So, and yet you have to act anyway, even,
Right.
because not to act is to act. There are choices we have to make. And that requires, again, I don't know what to
Mhm.
call it other than faith. And by
Right.
faith, I don't mean, oh, we know it'll work out all right if I follow my gut. We
Yeah.
don't know any such thing.
Right.
We just know that the universe is more or less right to be what it is. So we're going to have to do the best we can and accept responsibility for the choices we make.
Mhm.
So there's my Meta-Serenity
That's so beautiful, Bruce. That's so beautiful. That's going to be the quote, I know for sure.
prayer.
Our podcast cover. I love it.
Yeah, and you heard it here first because I just wrote that last week and I haven't quoted him anywhere else yet. So there it is.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Amazing. That's
Mhm.
great. Wow. I love that. So I would love to close with two questions, one for therapists and one for couples listening. So let's start with the therapist. I think you've helped us all so much. But in general, for a therapist who's just starting to work with a couple that's coming in, dealing with betrayal, what advice would you give them to kind of help them show up in a way that they can build safety and space for healing for that couple, for the healing to start?
Yeah. It is embodied in the therapist, of course,
Right.
that we be genuinely curious and compassionate, and it has to be genuine. And it is difficult when someone is telling things. I don't suspend my moral judgment.
Hmm.
I'm not sitting here thinking, "Oh, there's no such thing as right and wrong." No, quite the contrary.
Yeah.
But to be genuinely compassionate and curious, it's like, "Wow, you did," because they're usually already there. They're already condemning themselves. "Wow,
Exactly.
you did something really bad. What was going on? What's happening?" To invite that sort of curiosity, and for both parties, to let them know they're in that space. One of the things I routinely tell couples, it's sort of funny to say, and it's a funny moment early in my first session. Usually, it's usually about 20 minutes in. By then I've done a family diagram.
Yeah.
I've given my little confidentiality speech. I've asked my first couple of questions that I have my favorite questions. And about 20 minutes in, I will say, it's when I'm talking to them about stability and intimacy. And I'll say, with respect to stability, I say, well, now that we're old buddies because I've known you for 20 minutes, I can already tell something about the two of you I'm pretty sure of, and you can tell me if this is right. Neither one of you is batshit crazy, right? And, and I said, I don't mean to make fun of serious mental health issues.
Right.
In 30 years of doing this, I've had a handful of times where I haven't said something like that because somebody's having a manic episode or somebody's having a psychotic break or something. But overwhelmingly, the folks I'm working with aren't crazy. And I will often say, I trust you did not need me to tell you that. But they're smiling at that point and people have told me later, in later sessions, that was good to hear because they weren't sure they weren't crazy.
Exactly.
And but I only say that because I know it, because I believe it. That's not a technique. I didn't make it up. You know what I mean? It's like, I'm observing, well, pretty sure you're not nuts, right? So
Right.
you're not crazy, you're not evil, and you're not stupid. You're not any of those.
Exactly.
And already then they're saying, oh, so we're legit, we're valid.
Yeah. You're
That's what we
reflecting
can
back to
offer.
them, reflecting that sense of humanity that each of them, no matter how crazy they feel, can say, oh, wait, he's giving me back to myself that I'm not batshit crazy.
Yeah. And the basic thing then, I can summarize that in the same one word I've used before. What the therapist has to offer is faith,
Hmm.
and it has to be real. Now, it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be religious at
Right.
all, but it has to be real. It has to be a mindset that, you have to love the people you're working with. There's a
You do.
similar
Oh, I
thing.
say that all the time.
Yeah.
Really try to help therapists learn to love the people they're working with and love their
And
client, even though that's supposed to be taboo.
oh, well, I don't think, there's a
Yeah.
lot of things that are supposed to be, and look, I'm really careful with ethical boundaries. I'm not saying
Right.
those
I
are
don't mean
important,
not ethically, but,
but there's a lot of taboos. Well, I mean, and self-disclosure, for example, largely horseshit, those rules. I mean, again, I don't want to overstate it. You have to be careful that you don't make it be about, I shouldn't make it be about me,
yeah.
but I'm happy to disclose things about my own life. You've seen my website.
Yes.
I'm an open book. There,
Yes,
in some ways,
exactly.
literally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And that
exactly.
is not an impediment in any way to the work I do. Quite the
Mhm.
contrary. I want people to see me as an actual human being who has a basis for the things I think, and that
Yeah.
means they don't necessarily have to agree with me because they have different experiences. That's fine.
Yeah.
So that sort of thing. So again, what I tell
Beautiful.
therapists, it's faith. It's,
Yeah.
faith in the sense that I've described it.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And Bruce, it's such gold that you give. I just want therapists listening to recognize when you hear from a seasoned therapist what you just shared, right? Like you have this way that you work where you're going to ask a few of your favorite questions and how you want to show up in the room, and that you're coming from that presence of loving and being curious. And then, some of the golden things that you just do that you can see relaxes them or returns them to themselves. That's so wonderful. So thank you
Yeah.
for that. It's really, really touching. And for couples listening who, are in some sort of betrayal, what what steps should they take toward healing? Like they're still in shock or they're unsure, and what advice would you give the couple maybe who hasn't even reached out to a therapist yet?
Yeah. Yeah. It is. Well, that's, the book that I wrote is really a lot about how might you start that even before you've done any sort of therapy or whatever.
Okay.
And it is a lot about, in some ways, I suppose it's a lot about recognizing that same thing I just said that I say to couples when I meet them. I think I say that early in the book. I'm making some assumptions about the reader that you're not crazy, evil, or stupid. Just that, just starting with that understanding. Okay, you've just been through something that has you feeling crazy, perhaps.
Mhm.
Partly because maybe there was some actual gaslighting going on. People overuse that term. People use gaslighting when they mean lying. There's a
Right.
lot of lying, but it isn't always gaslighting. But occasionally there is genuine, someone is actually trying to make you think you're crazy. That's what gaslighting is. Lying
Mhm.
to you is not gaslighting. Lying is, when people have affairs, lying is part of the deal,
Yeah.
but that's what makes them affairs, really. But anyway, even with that people have to start to recognize, wait a minute, you're not crazy. Do what you can to take care of yourself, get yourself calm yourself down as much as you can. Then you've got some serious work to do, some serious thinking to do. And that's where maybe therapy comes into play. Talk with people, find friends and colleagues and advisors or clergy or whatever who will actually be good friends or advisors or clergy, and they won't
Mm.
tell you what to do and they won't be judging you. They'll
Yeah.
be actually open to hearing what your situation is and they're not freaking out themselves. That's what you need.
Yeah.
So,
Beautiful.
also what they need is faith, right? Same,
Yeah.
my all-purpose
Yeah.
word for everything.
Yeah.
You mentioned our podcast, Couples Therapy in 7 Words. I
7
should mention
words.
the 7 words. It's,
Please. Yes.
and I have it on a cup.
Oh,
Be kind, don't panic, and have faith. That's that first book I wrote is oriented around those 3 principles: be kind, don't panic, and have faith. I set it up with sort of
oh.
a quote from Hillel,
Mhm.
that what is hateful to your neighbor,
Right.
don't don't do, and that's the whole Torah. The rest is
Yeah.
commentary. So I set it up. I have a be kind section, don't panic section, and have faith section, and then now go and learn section. Um,
Yes.
and that the be kind in the sense of kinship, that's what
Mhm.
keeps people wanting to stay together. That sense that they are
Yeah.
kin. You
Right.
can't do that if you're in a panic. And faith is the antidote to panic. That's what I mean by that's what faith is. It says,
Yeah.
okay, this is awful. It's painful. I don't like it, but there's a rightness to it. I don't have to panic about it. I have to work with it.
Mhm.
That's what couples need to go into to get through any kind of serious problem, especially betrayal.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing the cup and the 7 words. And
Mm,
I think that helps therapists too in their work. It's just so important. That's amazing. I love it. We need to build more kinship.
yes,
Sure.
indeed. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Bruce, thank you so much for sharing so much of your wisdom and this amazing new book you have and your other books. I know people are going to be really excited to check them out, check out your podcast, the other offerings. I really acknowledge you for the work you're doing and really helping couples, helping therapists learn. And I'm already thinking about how I can have you back on here to talk about something else, your next book coming, or what it's like being an older therapist. We'll figure something out.
I would be delighted. This has
Yeah,
been a lot of fun for me. Thank you.
so much fun. Please let everyone know where they can find you. I'll link it in the show notes, but give them your little pitch so that we can make sure they have access to you.
Yep. Well, you said it earlier. It's if you spell my name right, you got it. So it's Bruce Chalmer, all one word, brucechalmer.com. And that's where you'll have information about my practice, which I'm available. I can do a coaching practice or psychotherapy in the states I'm licensed in,
Great.
and also information there about my books. There's a link there to get you to the podcast. The name of the podcast again, Couples Therapy in 7 Words. There's a website for that, which is sort of an abbreviation, CT in 7, CT in the number 7.com. That'll get people to our podcast as well, or they can find it anywhere there, how the
Yeah.
podcast channels work. They can find it any place.
Yeah, that's great. I'll make sure to link that too because I checked it out and it's really cool because you have like some mini blogs there. It's excellent. Yes. And Dr. Bruce is on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn and YouTube. So make sure you check that out and his book. Thank you again. I really appreciate all of your wisdom with us.
Well,
Um,
thank you.
yeah, awesome. Well, thanks everyone for listening. And until next time, keep it simple and keep showing up. Bye for now. Thanks for listening to A Simple Therapy podcast. If today's episode resonated with you, please subscribe, leave a review, or share it with someone who needs it. Your support means so much. You can learn more or get in touch at asimpletherapypodcast.com. And remember, let's keep it simple and keep showing up.